is what God wanted in that fifth commandment: honor your father and your mother, and with that loving, authoritative parenting type of role. George Herbert says, one father is worth more than 100 schoolmasters. And that's true if it's a loving, authoritative father like I had. But even if you're a poor man and you have that type of relationship with your children, children are a poor man's riches. Michael Levine says, having children makes you no more a parent than having a piano makes you a pianist, however. And that is, it's not just having children, it's actually having that loving, authoritative relationship with them. A house divided cannot stand. And of course, that came from Jesus himself. By the way, this children and parenting, I was just thinking the other day, the connection. It was actually when I was talking about the risk factors. You remember the risk factors if you don't have a loving father in the household among a boy. That risk factor is that they're more likely to go towards the same-sex attractions. And if there's not a loving, authoritative father with a girl being raised, she's much more likely to go into illicit sexual relationships with men at an earlier age, unwed parenting, those sorts of things are much more likely. And of course, if you don't have an involved, loving mother in the household, and you're a female, that's when the same-sex attractions among females, the lesbian thing can be made manifest, and also in regards to, if it's a boy, they're much more likely to go towards pornography, prostitution, and be seeking sexual partners among women all the time. And so the importance is there. But, I was thinking about my father because I remembered this. I was old enough to remember it, but the first 6 years of my life, my father was not very available. He was an engineer for General Motors, but then in the evening he would teach engineering at Wayne State University in Detroit. He was an engineer for the auto industry. And he was a very good teacher, taught thermodynamics. He would get Teacher of the Year award, and he had a great relationship with his students, but I just didn't see him that much at all. By the time he got home, I was being put to bed and that sort of thing. But what I developed, and I'm not sure it's a direct association, but, I was somewhat of a shy kid being raised, but I developed a good friend relationship with the boy across the street. And the kid across the street had 9 brothers and sisters. And he was exactly my age, and he and I were inseparable. And I remember at age 6, we knew nothing about sex or anything like that, but I remember at age 6 going home to my mother, and I was holding hands with my friend Randall, and I told my mom, and he was there too, that when we get older, we are going to get married. And she says, no, you're not. And I said, why? Why can't we get married? I mean, we just like everything about each other, and we have such great time, and I think this would be the right thing to do for Randall and I to get married. And she says, you'll figure it out. Now, I was thinking, if I had been a mother that was raised in today's society, she might have said, okay, that could be very appropriate. Yes, let's try to develop that sort of thing. And I realized how different my life would have been without that. But after age 6, I don't know if it was that association, because my parents are not here to ask them now, but it was shortly after that my dad quit working at Wayne State University. And he came home, and I started to do a lot more with my dad, and I developed a very loving, respectful relationship with my dad. And I'd want to be with him a lot, when he was doing things, like he flew a Cessna 182. I was telling Don on our hike today, we went to the Butte again and with Don and Diane this morning. But Diane was asking me, how did you get into flying? I'm a pilot, but I got into flying because my father was a pilot in a Cessna 182, and I would run the instruments. I'd learned how to run all the instruments and instrument conditions and all of that. And we would just have a great time together. When his charts would come in, I would help him put his charts into the right place for the new instrument charts, and just to be able to spend time with my dad. And those are very positive relationships. My only regret is there were a few times when my friends were competing to play baseball, and my dad maybe wanted me to do that, and I went off with my friends. But now I almost regret it. I'm thinking, you know what, it would have been better, because he was such a great mentor, such a loving but yet authoritative parent, and I really owe so much of that type of fatherhood in the home. But I don't know what it would have been like had he been totally gone again for the next, it was more important. I think those first 6 years, it's far more important for the mother types of things. But the older those kids get, the more important it is to have a stable, loving father in the house. Be it ever so humble, there's no place like home, and charity begins at home. I don't know if you've heard this phrase by a famous writer. When I was a boy of 14, my father was so ignorant I could hardly stand to have the old man around. But when I got to be 21, I was astonished at how much the old man had learned in 7 years. That was Mark Twain. And the older you get, if you're able to develop a relationship with your adult father after that, the more wisdom you realize they actually have. Well, what about motherhood? We can't neglect this. A mother's love for her child is like nothing else in the world. It knows no awe, no pity. It dares all things and crushes down remorselessly all that stands in its path. For the hand that rocks the cradle is the hand that rules the world. A mother understands what a child does not say. Mothers shape our world by nurturing and instructing children who grow up to make life-changing and history-making accomplishments. For every preacher, president, volunteer worker, employee, musician, athlete, technician, community worker, doctor, caregiver, and others, there is a mother behind them who fostered her child to reach his or her full potential. And speaking of the role of mothers and fathers, they're so very important. I actually had the opportunity this year, first time I had ever been asked to do this, but our pastor was gone at our church in Weimar, and I happened to be there that weekend, and so he gave me the message to preach on Mother's Day. And so I preached a Mother's Day sermon and went through all of the science of motherhood, which I'm not going through here, and in regards to how important that is. But also the difference between mothers and fathers. If you've noticed, and children as well, mothers have emotions that tend to be more similar to children than fathers have. This is why women cry more easily, those sorts of things. The voice is more childlike. If you hear a young boy's choir, it's very hard to tell on a recording whether this is a group of adult ladies or, young children that are singing. The voices are different. Of course, the heights, you could look at the emotions, the way the brain is and all of that. But in reality, the Lord had those mothers there because the mothers could understand what the child's not saying. The emotions are more easily tied in with the children, and they can be that advocate for the child in ways that a father cannot quite understand, but with that mother advocate, they can understand it because the mother is kind of somewhat of a cross between and that's why women, many people have written about how complicated women are versus men. But one of the reasons why they are more complicated is because they're kind of this cross between children and adults. They have things very much like an adult male, but very much like the child aspect of things. And the Lord realized that was the best person to be raising this individual, but also wanted that father figure in the household who was very loving, but had that perspective aspect of things. And I can tell you one particular role, it's happened many times in our household, but one particular role, how important this was. And that was when our third boy, Nathan, was getting booted out of academy in 10th grade. Actually, he was being suspended. But he was being suspended and was told he had to go home. He had to leave the academy. And we were just ready that next day. We were going to be going to Europe to speak. All the arrangements had been made, and we weren't able to take him into our home. He could go to the grandparents' place, but we knew the grandparents and a kid that needs a lot of attention and accountability and discipline, the grandparents would not be able to handle him at all, and he'd walk all over them. And I said, we have to fly over there, and I've got to see him tonight. First, I talked to the ones involved and told them the situation we were in, including the principal of the academy and all of that. And I said, is there any way you can have somebody there locally take care of him who's going to give him accountability without him interfacing at all with the academy? And they thought about it, and they said, you know what? Yeah, he can live in our house, and our daughter teaches elementary school, and she lives, down the place. But she'll come pick him up every day, and he'll have to go work at that elementary school. She'll keep him working, she'll keep him vacuuming, she'll do all sorts of things, and we'll keep him working like this. And so I knew about that ahead of time, that at least that was an opportunity. And so I came, and he was somewhat excited that he had been suspended because he'd much rather be home. And, this is okay. Oh, that's okay. I'll be with Mamiah and Tataya. This will be okay, and all of this. And I said, Nathan, you're not coming home. You're not coming home. And he started crying. And my wife started crying. And and so she says, Neil, we've got to talk. And so she takes me out and says, the poor kid, I think we've got to take him home. We've got to come up with something else. He doesn't like these people anyways. It's not going to be good and all of this. And I said, Erica, it's very, very hard, but the best place for him is here. He's got to learn from this experience. So I came back and I said, you are staying here. He says, let me tell you what's going to happen if I stay here. I am going to run away. I'm not going to obey anything that they do. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. He went through all of these threats. And then she gets very scared as she's listening to this, my wife Erica, and Neil, I told you we should take him home. And I just looked him in the eye and I said, Nathan, you just try that and see how much worse your life gets from even now. I said, you try that. It is not going to be a bit pretty, and you have no clue how your life is going to get worse. So he stayed. And with that, I don't know what the suspension was. It might have been 2 weeks. It was a pretty significant suspension. They could have kicked him out, but they didn't. But in that process of those 2 weeks, and I also gave him one other instruction. I said, I want you to write 3 to 5 things that you're thankful for every day for these people that you're staying with. I said, they might do this bad or whatever, but I want you to do a gratitude list. And so he did that, but at the end of those weeks, he said, you know what? I see these people far differently. Says, they're actually good people. And he says, they're actually fun and they're actually enjoyable to be around. But yet they work hard and they do things like this. He had learned in the process. And then I told him when he went back to school, he had to be thankful for his faculty. And he had to continue to write that. And I said, and at the end of the school year, if you do that, I'm going to read it all and you're going to be rewarded and you'll be very glad that you did that. But in that whole process of being thankful and developing that aspect of things, he turned his life around in that school, that 10th grade year. And that discipline ended up being for his own good, and he developed all that gratitude list. And he showed it to me at the end of the summer. I do remember that, but then I got called away to stop someone's bleed in the emergency room, and it got forgotten. And he didn't He didn't say anything more about it, but it tells you I wasn't that great a father. But when he graduated from business school, he says, "Dad, you said you were going to do something at the end of 10th grade when I did that, and I never got anything." But what a good kid he is. We have a great relationship and that sort of thing. But I'm thinking this is the importance of that loving, authoritative father in the household with both of them there, and recognizing what would be best for that kid. If we had just listened to his emotions and what he wanted to do, and his tears and his threats, that could have turned out a very different boy at the end of that time. But mothers shape our world by nurturing and instructing children who grew up to make life-changing and history-making accomplishments. I think I read that already. So with healthy families that are emotionally intelligent, authority is still there. But it's loving, compassionate authority, and it includes loving respect and appreciation for authority, with the recognition of the younger generation that the authority figures have had the same passions and desires at the same age that they currently have. It's important for them to understand that. Often they think we're different species and we have no clue what they're going through, and that we don't understand. They get very perturbed when we figure out they're romantically interested in someone and they're trying to deny it, and it's like, you don't realize we've had those same types of things. We can read you like an open book. But recognizing the younger generation does not have the perspective or frontal lobe abilities the older, healthy family members. This is why loving, authoritative parents in the household are very important for even helping people choose their own the college that they're going to go to. I'm really shocked today at how many parents just totally allow their kids to figure out where they're going to go in college. I can tell you my kids would have not chosen the right decision. But I help them make the decision by saying, yeah, you can go to any of those places, but there's only one place that Dad's going to support you. And they have all thanked me repeatedly in regards to where they went to college, because they realize how important it is, and they see their other friends that went to the same colleges that they were wanting to go to and how they've turned out and how different it is. And they're saying, thank you, Mom and Dad. They have that perspective. They don't have the frontal lobe ability. We have to help them through this process. And of course, it cannot and should not be equal love. There's no way they can love us like we love them. They don't have the capacity for that, but it also cannot and should be equal respect. As much respect as we have for them, they should have more respect for us. And if there's a problem with respect, we have to go back to more rudimentary things. And both will actually see the other generation as more valuable than they. What will happen with that? You will then develop what we call the signs of emotional intelligence. And since our series has been centered in on this, I'll just go through 14 signs of emotional intelligence outlined by Daniel Goleman. These aren't, I shouldn't say these aren't the principles of emotional intelligence, the principles we outlined earlier in the first night, those 5 principles, but these are signs. Knowledge accurate with your own strengths and weaknesses, able to focus without easily getting distracted. When you're upset, you know exactly why. And the why is not what just happened, it's what your thoughts are about what happened. Because remember, it's our thoughts that cause our emotions and behavior. You're able to get along with most people and also with most family members. You care deeply about being a good moral person, and you take time to slow down and help others when they need help and when you're a good person to help them. You're a good judge of character. Truth, accuracy, and thought is very important to you. You're self-motivated, but you know when to say no, and after a fall or lapse, you take responsibility and get right back up. And if you have all of those things combined with talent and a strong work ethic, you will have everything necessary to be a great leader. So I thank the Lord for creating this family unit that all of us have been able to be a part of. It's a wonderful aspect of being able to identify with Christ, to be able to identify with the aspects of his character in loving authority and compassion as well. And I hope you take the principles that we have taught this week and apply them in your lives, and your fulfillment, even in your family life, will grow, and really the sky is the limit on our success in emotional intelligence as we apply these principles. Any questions or comments? You know, at the end, I know I probably spoke a little bit over, but let me take about 3 minutes, because this is our last time. I'm going to be running off. I've got to speak today in California later on. But any questions? It doesn't have to be about this, but anything that we've talked about this week or other issues. Yes? Okay. All right, so the question is, what about those that haven't had good fatherly figures? Isn't it helpful for them to develop a relationship with one? And yes, absolutely it is. I mean, after that exchange that took place, this young gentleman that went through our program, he's actually African American, but he asked me to be his father figure. I'm very glad to do that, but I'm not the best father figure with all of the, he lives in Florida, I'm in California, all of those other types of things. But I think this is where the church family can enter into. And if you can get as part of a church family and have an older man that has wisdom and compassion and can identify with them, there's many good Christian men who have taken that role of mentoring younger men. And it's been a very positive relationship for the church and others. But that's a good place to start out with in trying to achieve that. Great question. All right, any other questions? Okay, go ahead. Yes, okay, so she was, there was a divorce that occurred and she was having them on weekends. And because I take it your husband was not as authoritative, yeah, not sure. But anyways, the kids didn't like the authoritative parenting of mother. And she was instructed to be a Disneyland parent, where you're just doing things with them, but not in an authoritative way. And in reality, often it's a combination that works best. We do have to be able to identify with some of their desires and be able to get down on their level and, even play with them and do things like this. I can tell you, even in the dorm setting at the Weimar Academy, those are young kids, and it's very important for the dean to be able to get out and down on their level and kind of play with them, but at the same time, have the authoritative, loving rules. And my two older boys, when they were in academy, they had a dean like that. Nathan did not have a dean like that. Our third one that I talked to you about. It's one of the reasons why I got into issues. But this guy, he came from the military. It was like a military school in that academy. They had to have their clothes this far apart. They had to do all this. If they didn't, they had to do push-ups, all of this. And I would think, how does this guy get by with it? I mean, it was military dress code. It was military everything in this boys' dorm. And they would be like little soldiers everywhere, but they loved this man. And the reason why they loved him is because he could really identify with them and he could play with them, and they realized he had a soft part to him. I'm not saying you weren't that way at all, but I'm just saying in general that's the principle. And so being a Disneyland parent without authoritative parenting, yes, they might have wanted you more on the weekends, but it wouldn't have been good for them. Yes.
way that you want it. And I can honestly say that my children have learned the best of whoever God sent. And I can't even tell you how many people and answers I have come over. And that created a gap that I couldn't do.
Yes.
My God.
Yes. Praise God. Great testimony.
Did you fulfill the 10th grade obligation to your son? And what was it?
Okay, he wants to know whether I fulfilled my 10th grade obligation to my son. Yeah, it actually has not been fulfilled yet, but it has been he has a commitment. Well, he knows that I'm going to actually support him halfway on a vehicle that he hasn't chosen yet, but he's choosing a little higher because Dad's going to support him on this process. Yeah, he's very glad that he waited. All right, well, it's been great being with you, and let's bow our heads and ask the Lord to be with us. Father in heaven, we thank you for the family unit, and we now pray that you would be with each one of us and our families, that you would help us to exemplify your character in the family household, and we thank you for the love and fulfillment that comes from being a parent like you have been to us. And we thank you for hearing and answering this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.